in this room, and then after that we'll begin. And I'm Neely Perlmutter, and I work with Della as the director of the field experiences.
I'm Jocelyn Weiner, and I'm an intern for Della at Cohen Hall.
I'm Rachel Barkowitz. I'm an intern at SHOS at Starting to Academy in 3rd grade with Nina. And is Dina coming? Okay.
I'm Barak. I'm doing my internship at Ghana Academy.
I'm Helena. I'm also doing my internship in Gann Academy in English.
I'm Sarah. I'm doing my internship at Metro West Jewish Day School in 4th grade.
Avi Minder. I'm doing my internship at JCDS in 5th grade with Saman.
Avital Ganzi. I'm doing my internship in Maimonides in 5th grade.
Kate Blyle. I teach 10th through 12th grade English at Gann Academy, and I'm working with Helena.
I'm Maria Levinson, I'm director of the education program.
I'm Leslie Baser, and I'm Sarah's field instructor.
I'm Limor, and I'm working in the Money Day School, 5th graders Ifrit, and I'm working with Bavital and here.
Esther Shaw. I'm a field instructor and coordinator of the mentors of the Hebrew, and I'm a field instructor of Bavital and Barak.
I'm Sharon Bobby-Nemzer, and I work with Della, among other things. I'm on sabbatical this year, but I came in to hear snapshots.
My name is Nina Kussner, and I'm Rachel's mentor at SHOS in 3rd grade.
My name is Eliza Weiss, and I'm Sarah's mentor at Metro West Jewish Day School in 4th grade.
I'm Elaine Cohen, and I'm the field instructor for Rachel.
I'm Leah Winkler. I'm Jocelyn's mentor at Cohen Hillel Academy in 3rd grade.
I'm Samara Hendon, and I teach 5th grade at JCDS, and I'm Avi's mentor.
I'm Cindy Shulak-Rome, and I field instructor at JCDS with Avi, with Samara and Andrea.
I'm Noreen Leibson, and I'm the faculty leader for the Della program.
So welcome, everybody. And I think what we will do is just start with Jocelyn here and go around.
Oh,
so
okay. My internet's still loading because I had to come.
I just need you to step back or sit back.
So maybe we should start with Rachel, and we can come back to you. And I'm going to actually set a little timer, so that way we make sure that Ravitala gets just as much time as Rachel does here. So you'll hear it like do some kind of leafy sound at a certain point. After 5 minutes, I'll let it face you. All right.
I'm just trying to find.
Okay. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, so this semester I've really been enjoying learning about taking an integrated approach between Judaic and general studies, and connection to the Della standard for planning for student learning by connecting information and ideas within and across subjects in general studies to Jewish studies, and also in context of Hattie and Yates. Teaching about how we form memory and through organizing ideas in our mind and making connections, and so just this idea of helping the students to build strings and associations by connecting what they're learning in one lesson to previous lessons, but also across different subjects. And I've really been enjoying watching the kids make their own connections. They get so excited when they're able to make their own connections. I've enjoyed that. And one of my questions that I have that I'm taking out of this semester with is sort of connected to this idea of making connections, but also in the context of Perkins' approach to teaching, also in the context of Perkins' approach to teaching, also in the context of Perkins' approach to teaching elements and skills in isolation, like just teaching grammar, skills of grammar lessons, but teaching grammar in context of their own writing. And so making connections that way. And so my question for myself is, how can I do that in a meaningful way for the kids in terms of them being Jewish? How can I make their, even studies, like make a whole game for them to really understand their identity as a Jewish person in their own approach to science or their own approach to learning to write.
Thank you. So we'll open the floor to questions and comments now.
I'd love to hear a concrete example of the kind of connections you're making between general studies and Jewish studies. And I'll just say it also sounds to me like you're really inventing a new meaning for the whole game. Because if you're talking about, it seemed to me that Perkins is talking about disciplinary knowledge. So how are you using this? What's the game that you're trying to teach your students? Is the game being Jewish? Is the game being a writer? Or is the game, are you trying to, that's what I thought. Maybe you're making a new game by putting these together. I guess I was still trying to.
Yeah, I think that was my question for myself is can I find a way to do that, to learn how, first of all, learn how to, it's teach through a whole game, creating a whole game. But also will I be able to do that in the sense of in combining that with the integrated approach between Jewish and general studies. So I guess, yeah, I am trying to combine the two ideas.
And do you have a way of describing the game you're trying to teach?
No, it's still a question for me. Will I be able to? How can I do this?
And what is it?
Yeah, and what will it look like? Yes. So some examples. When I was teaching for Thanksgiving, about Thanksgiving, so we wanted to take what does it mean for us as Jewish people? How can I teach Thanksgiving in a Jewish context? And so I talked a lot about just giving thanks is a very Jewish value, and so we focused on that. And then later, when I was doing my sequential learning on Hanukkah, I brought in a lot of that crossover ideas of giving thanks, and I reminded them we started learning about this in Thanksgiving.
Other questions or comments? I wondered if, and maybe you started to say this because I was a little distracted by by the technology. But you're going to be teaching this unit on this book, The Cricket in Times Square. Have you thought at all about that and what it might mean to integrate there?
I have been thinking about how I will be able to do that. I've only begun thinking about it. Not enough to share. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
So this year,
I'm just going to move out of the way. Go ahead.
So this year I've actually grown a lot, and there were so many different things that I could have chosen. But one that I really wanted to focus on was Standard 4D uses materials and resources to make subject matter accessible to all students. There's a smart board in my classroom, which I've had to learn a lot about. And even in my last observation by my field instructor, Shira Horowitz, she said that I was getting a lot more comfortable, and I've had to use digiblocks in a few math lessons, which was a very big struggle for me at first, and it went absolutely horrible my first lesson, and now I can use it one-on-one with kids, and that's kind of really exciting. And even today, I was able to use the smart board on my own, which is a huge thing for me. It's absolutely great. And it was really cool because usually I'll have to ask my mentor to help, Leah. But today, this afternoon, she wasn't there, and so I just had to kind of do it on my own and figure it out, and I was able to do it. And so while I was on my drive originally, I was going to choose a different standard, but then thinking about it on my drive, because there was traffic, I had time to think, and it was really cool to be able to say, wow, I was able to, for once, just do this on my own. Nobody else was in the classroom. And I was able to use resources to help kids with their graphic organizers for a lesson that I wrote, and it was really cool, so yeah.
Do you have a question?
Oh, I have lots of questions, but one question that I'm really having throughout this year is, how do I go from teaching a class of 8 kids to knowing if I'll be comfortable enough to teach a class of 20 or 25? And that's a really huge overall question that I've had a lot of times this year. So,
Questions and comments for Jocelyn?
Jocelyn, what you described reminded me of the sink or swim, right? Sink or swim method of learning. You've had a lot of support from Leah, and then Leah left and you had to figure it out yourself. So you knew you were either sink or swim, and you swam. So I think that, what you were able to show yourself is that you were able to. You just had to be in a situation to take over.
Yeah.
Do it. That's great.
Can you tell me how you use the smart board? I'm very impressed you do it. But how you use that? Can you give me an example of how that works and makes the learning more visible to students?
So, for example, for the lesson that I've been teaching today, and it started yesterday, we're writing a paragraph about a place we'd want to travel to, and then 3 reasons with a detail for each reason, and then a closing sentence. And so we start with our graphic organizer, which I already have on the smartboard, and the kids are able to come up with a list with me of places we want to travel to. I chose Disney World, though, before any of them had already made their list, and we were able to all together, without anyone having to worry about, oh, if I get in the way of the projector, then nobody will be able to see this, or oh, we have to turn down the lights so then this kid won't be able to see this. Without any of that, we were able to all go through the graphic organizer, how to self-edit the paragraph as a class, and making edits with each other, as well as in past lessons, we've used a program called Scratch that Leah uses with the kids, and it's been on the smartboard. And it's a very visual way that all kids can be engaged. And it's also interactive. So it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
I can add something. I can vouch for working with a smartboard that it's really helpful, especially with the students that struggle to sit in front of you in a very graphic way, and especially to come to the board for them, it's always exciting. So I know that not all school can afford it, but if you have it and you don't use it, it's too bad. It's really learn how to use the smartboard.
I also heard you saying it's not that the smartboard was one area, but you also were using materials that are more concrete, like the digiblocks. And I was curious, like, if you learned something about how to use materials in the classroom, because you said at the beginning it was horrible, and now they're very useful. So I'm curious if you learned anything that you could generalize about maybe using manipulatives in math or materials in the classroom.
Everything has to have a purpose, and you have to think of why you're using it and what reasons you're using it before you use something, as well as lots and lots and lots of practice and sitting with Leah.
Thank you. And Bra.
So I wish it was in Hebrew, but English. So anyway, so I teach, I do my internship with GAN, but I also teach there another class. And if it's okay, Nere, I'm going to speak about the class that I teach. I don't know if you can imagine a class of only 6 students. It might seem easier in many ways, but I don't find it easier at all because for many reasons. I'm going to speak about at least one of them. But if maybe Kate can help me with how to define one of the students, I won't say his name obviously, but he suffers from autism, or do we have any?
He's on the autism spectrum, that's all I know as far as a diagnosis.
Yeah, diagnosis. And the great thing about his parents that they don't want any of the teachers to know what is the specific diagnosis, because they want him to be treated as any other student at the school. Obviously, we can treat him as any other student, but as far as I'm concerned, is the same level that any other student in the class. Magic, working hard, smart, probably as any other, and he loves. I teach Hebrew, and I teach. I need to say that I teach a certain level, which is novice high, and the kids are in junior. They're junior, 11th grade, and Esther can say that you can. By this time, after learning the Hebrew language for at least 6 years, you can expect the kids to move on from novice high to intermediate low, at least. But for many reasons, they are stuck at novice high for years. And so my standard that I want to speak about is standard D, which is promote equity, and especially on making them believe, each one of them, including the autism, the student that suffers from autism, believing that they can go to the next level. But I found it hard because this is the year when the grades is more important than any other year because of the application for the college, and few of the parents wanted to know how am I going to do that, because I said to them in the beginning of the year, I expect each one of the students to move out of his chair, convenient chair of novice high, and let's make it intermediate low. And they said, okay, how are you going to do that? Because 10 years we are in the same place. And working hard, believing, and we're going to speak Hebrew. They're not going to write, they're not going to read as much, we're going to speak Hebrew. We're going to speak with the 3 tenses, present, past, and future, and we'll see where it goes. Just going to shake them a bit and see if they're going to have fun in the class, believe in me as a teacher, they might believe on themselves as a student, and then they ask, what about the grade? And I asked each one, I did, that's what I did. I asked each one of the parents, what is your grade that you will be satisfied with? And most of them said specific grade, and I told them, okay, this is the grade that your son or daughter will going to get, but just make sure that on the 22nd of December, they're going to be ready to the test. Okay, so what's the test going to be about? And I gave them the whole syllabus and curriculum, and we moved. Once the parents was part of my program, my goal, and they didn't consume much of the grade, because they felt I know, or I share with them their concern about the grade, and they were more easy. I don't have any complaints from the students or the parents, and I think we're moving in the right direction. My question is, to what extent I differentiate what's happening in the classroom, because in the second language, each one of the students is on a totally different scale. So I found myself telling one of the students, you should read more, you should write more, and the other, you should do only 3 grades of this specific target, and the other one more. And I differentiated, but again, it's only 6 students, and like Joe saying, how is it when you have 40, like in Israel? How many you lose on the way?
comments or questions?
So, Barack, when you said this to the parents, did you ask the same question of the students? I mean, I just wonder, you have the parents over here,
Oh,
Gerald,
yeah.
but where are the students?
Students, I tell them what I always, it's my second year. It might sound strange, but after you know me, you kind of live with that. I told them that I don't care about the grades.
That doesn't sound strange.
I don't care. I just don't care about the grades.
But
and then I added to that, I care about you, moving out from your comfort zone, study, believing, whatever it is. Make the effort, try to keep along the way with what I'm trying to teach you, and the grade will come.
Did you find that taking the grade off the table affected their motivation, or it made them less stressed?
Both of them. And every school has is politics in so many ways. Again, it's a private school, and there's something about the grades and expectation that it goes together. I'm not fighting it. Just for me, it's like you can't give anyone C unless you're gonna prove you tried everything that you can in your power, whatever it is, to make it better. And it makes sense in a lot of ways.
Do they have problems only with language or with other topics? Do you know how they...
The students themselves,
Yeah.
most of the students are good students. Again,
There are good students in
Yeah.
other topics, but
In
only
that
the problem
class.
is only for language?
Like those 6 kids in their other courses again, do those 6 kids
they're
also
succeeding,
struggle?
they're doing well. They're doing well.
So it's only language.
It's only language, basically. Yeah, for them, most of them, very bright students, but somehow in Hebrew, even though they went to JCDS, Schechter, whatever, just name it, Novice High, all over, along the way. I don't know the reason.
There is no such a thing as exempting students from languages, like here. Student has some learning issues with languages, he can take another course. They don't have it.
No.
Domestic.
I don't think we've ever exempt students from Hebrew.
No, only, no.
So how did it turn out? Because you said by past December 22nd, did your students make progress?
So few of them gonna go to an OPI test, which is gonna evaluate their, and even though it's only the first semester, I do expect some of them already to be at the next level. One of them already did, and she moved up to in a different class, but I do expect all of them in the end of the year.
Thank you, Brad. And Helena, and I think what we'll do after Helena is I'm going to then switch to projecting, and we'll do our 2 distant people, and then we'll keep going around. So Helena.
So I've done a lot of thinking about everything I've learned over the past couple months, and it's a lot, like Jocelyn said. But something that I wanted to think about was standard 3, Delit standard 3, which is know the subject matter for teaching. And it seems kind of obvious, like, of course you have to know the subject matter for teaching, but I had an epiphany about just how deeply you have to know the subject matter that you're teaching. So I was tasked with teaching a William Faulkner short story, Barn Burning. And I read the story, and I read it again, and I thought, okay, now how am I going to teach it? So I jumped into a lesson plan and wasn't super happy with the lesson plan, but wasn't really sure why. And I brought it to Kate, and Kate and I talked about it, and we essentially decided there's a much more effective way to teach this lesson to help these students get much more out of this story. So we did a lot of research into the story, how other people have taught it, the time period in which the story is set, and I felt like I had a whole new understanding of this story that I personally had read several times at that point, but I learned that it's not necessarily just about knowing the text in front of you, but learning about the background and learning from other teachers who have taught it can give you a whole new perspective. So we shifted the focus of the lesson, and I think the lesson turned out much better than it would have in the first place. And I left the actual lesson still reflecting on what I could have done better, how I could have been a more effective teacher. And I just had this epiphany that the teacher needs to be the person in the room who knows the material so much better than everybody else in the room. And that seems so obvious, but sometimes it just becomes even more evident. And I'm working on a unit plan for 1984 right now, and I've put this new epiphany into practice, and I've been doing a lot of research into the text as I've been planning, and I'm continuing to do more research as I go back to the text and think more about the lessons I'm going to be teaching. And this has opened up a lot more questions for me, a lot more questions, because I'm scared that when I actually have a class, or not actually have a class, but when I have a full teaching load, it'll be much more difficult to take that time to do all that research for every single book that I'm teaching, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to be able to do that when I have 4 different classes that I need to prepare for every day. And another question that I've been thinking about is, if I've so thoroughly prepared every answer to every question that I'm going to ask, or an intended answer for every question I'm going to ask, how can I avoid swaying students to only see the answer that I thought of? Because I want my students to think of more than just what I thought. So those are my big questions.
So, Helena, you said after talking through the lesson that you really shifted it and changed it. I'm wondering if you could give one or two examples of what you did differently after you had this experience of really delving more deeply into the subject matter.
Oh, yeah. So the text Barn Burning is about a white tenant farmer in the 1930s. So we decided that it could be interesting to look at the more materialistic elements of the story and why the fact that he was a white tenant farmer specifically really mattered, and how that showed itself in the fact that he was burning rich people's barns. He was trying to get rid of other people's wealth, and why that was significant.
And was it that you hadn't noticed that detail or its significance? Like, I think we're asking for you to flesh out this.
Yes.
I think the lesson that you've learned is so profound.
It's
not self-evident at all. But having an example of how a deeper understanding of something changed the way I thought about teaching it would, I think, just give us a more vivid sense of this insight.
It wasn't necessarily that I didn't notice that he was a white tenant farmer, but it was that someone pointing out to me that what he was doing, or it was someone on the internet, but that person pointing out that this text was about this man destroying other people's property just made me see the text in a whole different way and made me ask more questions of the text that I hadn't even thought to ask.
Thank you. So the whole issue about preparation is really challenging, but part of what you're talking about is, that's why when people say teachers only teach for 9 months and they have a short day, that's why it's not true. So I think that people work very hard in the summer to anticipate and to do that research and to think about what they want to do. And the other thing is that I think after you teach it once, you go back again and think about it again. And, that's the advantage of it. Your first year, you're just learning so much. But to have the luxury of having taught it once and then to think, how can I get into this more deeply? Both how can I open my eyes, but also how, what does that mean for my own teaching? So I think those are great questions.
And to piggyback off what Maria is saying, I think also that the first iteration of a unit is not going to be
the ultimate, and like I think it's really daunting to think like I'm going to have a full caseload and I want to have every unit be absolutely perfect and deep, and like the students are going to get something out of it because you're a thoughtful teacher, and so that like if you focus on one unit every year that you're really delving deeply into, that's my personal strategy, and then you start to get your feet on the ground, because I think it is overwhelming to look at it as too much, and that can be like there's no way you can do it perfectly the first time. Can I just say one more thing that I think is really amazing that you're doing, is that you're not reinventing the wheel, and you're using a discerning eye, and the internet can be a great resource for teachers because there's so much out there, and as long as you're like deciding what you like and what you don't and what you think is worthwhile, if somebody's already done it and it's there for you, like why not use it, you know? So.
Thank you. Sarah Greenberg, we're going to have you go next. And so I'm going to ask, you should unmute yourself, and I'm going to make this project. Hey, now we can hear you. Just hold on 1 second. Let's hope we can see you. That's a good sign. Even though you don't see her, you will in a moment. A little stretched out in a weird way. We're going to have to just...
Oh, I see. I don't like that I'm that big. That is very daunting.
I just need something that might make it better.
It's not daunting to us, so don't worry,
Yes,
Sarah.
yeah.
It looks actually kind of like everybody else sitting around the table, seeing you from here up. So don't worry.
Okay. So, go?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. So I just really agreed with everything everyone said. I've been sitting here like going like this. But so one thing that I consider a powerful learning that I've had this semester, and something I've really seen over and over in my classroom, is how much my first graders are so naturally inquisitive, and that they really love to learn and they love asking questions. And just last week we were talking in our Brandeis class about how sort of statistically in the last couple of years there's been a drop in student questioning in the classroom, and all I could think of was, not in my class, they should come here. Just today, just in the middle of language arts, one of my kids came up to my desk and asked me, what's the biggest number? And I said, there is no biggest number, you know, any number you can think of, just add 1 to it. And he says, no, I mean, like, what's the biggest number that we know of? And I didn't, we had this, mini conversation about infinity, and I said, well, it's not really a number, it's a concept. And he was just like, oh, and I could tell he's going to go home and think more about it, because I didn't really have a great answer for him. And my kids all the time are asking me questions that I don't know the answers to, and I really think that's a testament to the really great culture of learning that my mentors have built in the classroom, that they feel comfortable asking these questions. And I think going into this year, I assumed that kids would just ask the questions as they came up, and I didn't really consider it all the classroom building and work that has to go in to create that place where they feel safe enough to share their questions. But the standard I wanted to focus on specifically in that learning was 4B, design short and long-term lesson plans that foster student inquiry and understanding. Because when we sort of talk about the before and after of how we've changed as teachers over the course of the last semester, the before me very much associated this standard with planning lesson plans and units that, planning activities and planning what specific content knowledge you want them to get out of your lesson or your unit, whereas the after me, or the in-process me, is really learning and has learned that planning involves sort of how can we harness that inquiry that my students just have so much of, and encourage questioning and encourage, inquiry and understanding, and how that's just as big a part of planning a lesson and planning a unit. And so one of the ways I still want to grow in that area is to, kind of like Helena was saying, continue to develop subject knowledge background in areas I'm not as well versed in, so I can have better conversations with my kids about, just from today, big numbers and infinity, and because that's a hard concept for adults to talk about, and I wanted to be able to have a better conversation with them about it. And just learning this semester about more ways to help keep my students' inquisitive nature alive, because I think also a big part of it is they're first graders and they haven't developed as much school inhibitions as some of the older students might have, and how do we keep that going as they get into the older grades. And that wasn't my question that I also came up with. The question that I came up with this semester is about integration as a day school teacher, and the standard that ties to is standard 4F, connects information and ideas within and across subjects and between general and Jewish studies. And it's been really interesting to go to different schools and see how different teachers have come up with different ways to integrate their general and Judaic studies. And so my sort of question about integration is really like a whole bunch of questions just surrounding integration, and how can I go about implementing effective integration in a way that doesn't come across as force. I think sometimes students can tell when you're like really forcing something. And what are some different ways to find resources for integration with Judaic studies? Because those resources can be harder to find and harder to use than general studies as curricular integration. And then something that I've been talking with my mentors about is how do you know if something is like quote unquote enough to count as integration? Like when we do the calendar in morning meeting, we do like the schedule, we do it in Hebrew too. We talk about we're talking about social curriculum in the classroom. We're talking about showing our classmates kavod and savlanut. And so does that like count, in creating a Jewish classroom? So those are the kind of questions I have about implementing curricular integration in a way that's helpful, but also feels organic and not like there for the sake of being there, that it's useful.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's take time for questions and comments from people.
Can she hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay.
But speak up.
So I'll just make a comment. Sarah, I love the way you described, your evolution from what sounds like the mechanics of planning and being focused on that to the in-process you, and that you're really recognizing that that's really a stage in the development of your teaching, and that you're really thinking about the kinds of conversations that you have with your students. And I think one of the things that that I've seen some teachers model really beautifully is that there's so many great things that you can do when students ask questions that you don't know the answer to, that really can model, can model for them, oh, I don't have to know everything because I'm the teacher, but, let's find out together, or how can we find out, or, that really speaks to, what you were talking about in terms of harnessing, that sense of inquiry and curiosity that you want to keep alive in your classroom. So I think it's great that you're thinking about all that stuff right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I thought it was really interesting how you were talking about the classroom culture that your mentors have created to make it possible to have students ask questions all the time. And I think that it can be really, the ways teachers do that can be very subtle and nuanced. And I'm wondering if you've seen any concrete strategies that your mentors are using that you'll take with you when you go, things that you see them do that create that culture.
So my mentors from the beginning of the year modeled mistake making and like on the chalkboard, like when they made a mistake, they would point it out and they would talk about it. And when we model the way we want activities to go for the kids, we will ask each other questions like, but Maura Sarah, what do I do if this? So sort of just that, and then the relationship she builds with each kid, and the relationship that I'm trying to build with each kid, where they feel like we're like we're on their team. I think that also really helps. That each kid feels like even the ones that quote unquote, like some kids, someone was just asking me today about like getting in trouble, and we had a whole conversation about getting in trouble doesn't mean we're not on their team. So I think each kid in our class generally feels like the teachers are on their team, which really helps in like getting them to participate in the classroom and feeling like we want them to participate in the classroom.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah,
And Aharon, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hello. So, Neely, if I share something on the screen, do you know how it'll come up?
We should
Like,
just see it. We will all see it. If you click your little blue share screen button.
all right, so we'll just try it.
Okay.
See what happens. Okay. So can you still see my face?
No.
I might
okay.
be able to make it so we can, though.
Oh, yeah, there we are.
I mean,
Yeah,
it doesn't really matter that
Now
much
we
to
see
me.
your
It doesn't-
face.
Okay.
Sorry.
But,
You may want to get rid of that one that's over it.
Yeah, I'm trying to see
Up
if I...
at the top. There you go. Okay.
Anyway, yeah, okay, so, great. So, definitely hearing, we must all be in the same program, right? Because we're all thinking about the same stuff, more or less. So my learning, this is how I'm kind of phrasing it. Jewish schools are challenged by the dual curricula, right? Trying to accomplish so much. And in many ways, like time, prioritization, and coherence, to name a few. So thoughtfully planned units integrating goals and content in Judaic and general studies are a powerful response and solution to these challenges. In the Dalit standards, we are given a mandate to integrate. So the experience that this is coming from, it's coming from a lot of places, but the main thing is the guided lead teaching that we did. So just to kind of preface, I'm going to read this here. So one of the things I've been realizing more and more during this semester is just how much I love reading with children. Not just reading to them, which I already knew I loved a lot, but really reading with them, sitting together and talking as we read, clarifying ideas, making connections and asking questions. As part of the Guided Lead Teaching Week, I had the opportunity to read with my second grade class quite a lot during that week. I also had the opportunity to make a strong connection between the English language arts curriculum and the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. We used the story elements model to help us comprehend the process, comprehend and process the story that we used before, during, and after the reading of the text. And by the story element model, I think everybody knows what I'm talking about, but just kind of breaking up the story into characters and setting and main events and theme and these sorts of things. So doing this really helped us access new levels of depth, reflective thinking, and comprehension that likely would have been missed if we had just treated the story purely as a read aloud, which is, if I hadn't been working with my mentor and trying to kind of align things and thinking about integration, I probably would have just said, oh, here's a great Hanukkah story, let's do a read aloud. So my last point here. So likewise, using the Jewish content of the Hanukkah story, which has a high degree of personal connection and meaning to the students in our class, really gave strength to the engagement and the connection that they had to the text of the story and the comprehension strategies that we were learning about at the same time. So, while this was not the first time the kids had heard about setting and characters and theme, it was definitely the first time they had worked with it all at once, as like a map, like a real comprehension tool. So I want to connect this to a couple of the standards. First, kind of obviously, is standard 4F, and spoken about a few times here, that the teacher connects information and ideas across subject areas and between general and Judaic studies. More specifically, the line about creates appropriate links across subjects and between general and Jewish studies that support conceptual understanding, and connects key concepts and underlying themes across subjects and between general and Judaic studies, seeks opportunities for authentic integration. So, not to beat the horse over the head here, but it was just, we saw this opportunity. I had this great story that, kind of a version of the Hanukkah story, and it was kind of that time of year where it was the right time to start doing this stuff in English language arts in terms of the story model, and it just kind of all fit together, and it really did support the conceptual understanding of the story a lot. So in addition to that, I also feel this is really connected to standard 3 of knowing subject matter for teaching, specifically that the teacher assesses and develops subject matter knowledge and understands central concepts in core subjects and their connections with content knowledge, recognizes that content knowledge is constantly evolving and takes appropriate steps to deepen and extend content knowledge. So this speaks towards integration, particularly because of the need for deep and flexible content knowledge in order to integrate coherently. So, like Sarah was talking about, not wanting these things to be forced. If we really, have a deep relationship to the content that we're dealing with, it's going to be a lot easier for us to see the connections. And in both of these content areas, that was certainly the case for me, not like so deep and profound, but deep enough that the connection was very rich and meaningful. The final standard that I really thought this was relevant here is in 3B. It says acquires and uses subject-specific pedagogy, consistently draws from a wide repertoire of subject-specific methods, possesses knowledge of broad range of curricula, relevant technology, and other resources, flexibly uses knowledge about the way students construct understanding of the content. My point here is not at all to my own horn, but rather to say that I'm seeing this sort of the potential to embody all of this kind of awesome teacherness in this statement here, specifically in the act of trying to integrate. And specifically this idea of repertoire, having a rich repertoire of moves and different styles of pedagogy. So this idea of repertoire speaks to the different ways in which meaning is normally sought after or constructed in different curricular strands. So like when reading a Jewish story, I never would have necessarily thought to, use the story element model. It's a Jewish story. I'm just gonna read it, right? but in fact, making the connection really made it a lot stronger. So in addition to finding content connections, there may also be potential for cross-pollination of process. So for example, we didn't really do this as much, but I'm kind of thinking ahead now a little bit, where a standard Torah study technique like a Ruta study or a close reading of text or like, finding the gaps in a story, kind of like what's missing, midrash, and then kind of coming up with your own versions of the story based on that, might be applied to a non-Torah body of content. And of course the inverse, which is more the experience they had during the guided teaching week with the Hanukkah story we used.
I want to encourage you to try to find your endpoint so we can also have a couple minutes for conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, we're basically done. The question is related. I'm not going to throw like a whole bunch more at you, standards. So before this experience, I very well would have probably used this story as just like to read aloud. Maybe stop here and there to point out some vocabulary or bring out a certain theme. But now I realize that every Jewish story or content topic is really a potential opportunity to integrate and draw strong connections between the Jewish studies and the language arts. So I look forward to developing this line of thinking wherever possible, exploring Jewish holidays and the other general ed content areas during the next several months. My question is really about everything besides language arts, right? So how can I, and how do other teachers make meaningful and coherent connections and integrations between Jewish studies and the rest of the K through 6 core curricula, like science, math, social studies, art, etc. That is where I still have several questions, about curriculum planning and prioritization and everything, but I'm really focused on this idea of integration because it felt like such a success and something I learned a lot from, but now I'm really kind of wondering, what about science? What about social studies? I mean, it's a whole different ballgame. So, my question is, I'm looking to find more kind of examples of success in those areas and see what I can learn. And that's it.
Thank you. We actually are gonna thank Aharon and move to the next person because that was our Aharon time. Thank you, and I'm gonna just unplug this. I'm just going to make it so there's no projector on. All right, Sarah.
So the most important thing that I think I've learned this semester, I kind of categorize as the importance of being over-prepared on a small level within each lesson. And I related it to the standard 4C, which is preparing for the particulars. Because I've noticed as much as you may plan a lesson, still things will go wrong and you will not account for things. And no matter how many hours we spent on our units and each individual lesson, there's still things that are going to go wrong and are going to fall short or are going to take too much time. And I think that really trying to consider this before the lesson starts is the best way to go about kind of figuring out what could potentially go wrong, but not just figuring that out, but what are you going to do when that happens, which for me is the greatest challenge, because I can tell you the 26 things that might go wrong when I teach any given lesson, but I don't always know what to do with that. So really spending the time to consider that and thinking about each intricate part of each lesson, I think is something that I've learned is one of the biggest parts of becoming a teacher and figuring out how to do all of the things in the classroom. And on a larger scale, often what happens in our school, and I'm sure in other schools, is you may think that a certain special is going to be happening and then that teacher suddenly doesn't come in or last minute something gets changed or another teacher can't do the thing you're supposed to be doing with them. And so always having things kind of in your back pocket ready to go if you need to surprise have a 45-minute block with your students that you weren't planning for is really, really helpful. And kind of relating it back to UVD, which we've been really trying to work with, and planning all of our lessons kind of starting at the end. If you know where you want to go, you can fill it in, even if you don't have necessarily an activity planned already. But if we have a science block that we weren't thinking we were going to have, and we know that we want them to understand why a shelter is important, which is what we were doing today, we can fill something in there. So I think that that's really the one thing that I've learned the most and I want to keep working on. And my question kind of arose through an interaction I had with a student right before vacation. It was like 2 minutes before they were about to leave, and one student came over and she hugged me and she looked up at me and she said, "I love you." And then she said, not in a weird way, in a teacher way, which was so her and such a great little moment. And I guess my question is, what does that mean to kind of have that love with your students in a teacher way? And how important is it that they love you or that they like you? And how do you strike that balance between being loved and liked and being respected and listened to? And kind of, for me personally, not slipping into being like a counselor, which is what I'm most comfortable being, because I've done that way more than being a teacher. So thinking about standard 1B and how you interact with your students. And is it okay if they come and sit on your lap, or is it okay if they look at your phone and play music from your phone, like certain things that we do in our classroom or don't do, what works and what doesn't work, and kind of how you maintain the teacher's stance. How do you maintain the teacher's stance, but also build meaningful relationships with the students in your class?
Good question. None of you can sit in my lap.
What age are you teaching?
4th grade.
Okay. Because it's really important, sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be weird in high school.
You could get fired.
Questions? I know in Noreen's class last semester we talked about loving the learner and whether or not we as teachers can believe that we love kids or if we just have a warm, fuzzy feeling for them. What do you believe after having that moment last semester?
That's a hard question, because I know we did talk about it. Like, you don't want to, love your students too much, because then they're not your students next year, and it is this kind of passing relationship that you have. But I think, I know it wasn't her intention, but the way that she said it, in a teacher way, not in a weird way, I think that's it. I love them in a student way, not in in the way that I love my siblings or other people who come into my life. But I guess that's my question, is where does that, how do you, you don't need to quantify or qualify that love, but how do you hold it in a way that they can feel it, that they feel like they can come to you when they have a problem, which had happened with her earlier in the day, which I think kind of sparked that. She had something going on at home and I helped her with it. So I think that worked there.
I want to say something about it. I think it's great that she loves you. Just means that she trusts you. You already build a relationship with her, and you can fly high with her. I can tell you a private story about my daughter. She hates math in the elementary school. She really doesn't. She didn't like it. I think I cannot blame the teachers, but I also can definitely approach to some of the teachers, the ways that they taught her, they didn't treat her maybe nice, they had no relationship with her, I don't know what's happened. But in 6th grade, all of a sudden came new teacher for math, brand new, she just graduated university. And she changed my daughter's life in terms of math. Now she's junior, my daughter, she loved math, she loved. And I can definitely approach this with this teacher. And I will always be thankful for what she did for my daughter. So I think take it as a compliment. But you also need to know the limits to do with her. As a teacher, from my experience, I don't feel comfortable to let my students, even to my kids, to be on my iPhone or whatever. You have to know your limits. You should
keep with the relationship, but you also have to give her some limits, like what she can do and what she cannot, So.
And that's kind of what I hear you asking, Sarah, is how do I figure out what are those limits? Because one person might feel like, okay, it's fine for them to play music from my iPhone, and somebody else might say, that's my limit. And there's, you don't find that written in some book somewhere, right? Like, these are, this is how you define those kind of personal boundaries.
I wanted to go back to the first point that you made, which I also thought was important, the importance of planning and what you said, over planning. I once read a really interesting article that made a distinction between planning and preparation. And the author said, and he'd done some studies of how teachers plan, and he said, deep planning prepares you to be spontaneous, prepares you to be able to act flexibly. I think it takes experience to get there, but I think you're headed in a direction where the kind of imaginative anticipation of what might happen allows you, and you have things in your back pocket and you're inside your subject matter like you were saying, it actually sets you up for a kind of flexibility. I don't think it happens so quickly, but I feel like that's a distinction that might be useful down the road.
I think knowing kids the way, like your individual students, the way it sounds like you're getting to know them is huge in that too, because as you're planning, you're literally thinking about how's this going to work for so-and-so. You can anticipate who's going to get antsy at which point in the lesson. So those relationships become part of that over-preparation too.
I just wanted to add one other thing, because you mentioned a few times how many things could go wrong, and you never know what might go wrong, but it might actually be that something goes so well that the students just get something right away, or that you allot 3 minutes for a little discussion and they just want to talk for 20. So it could be that you're having this wonderfully successful lesson, but you didn't plan for that or prepare for that. So
it didn't go wrong, it just went differently.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing.
Thank you, Sarah. And Avi.
Great. So I'm going to relate my my new learning to Standard 5, Section D, which is uses material, which Austin talked about, uses material and resources to make subject matter accessible to all students. And I want to talk a little bit about differentiation. Differentiation is something that's very new to me. It's something that I've just really started to explore at the end of last semester and into this semester. And because of that, I'm left with more questions than I am answers at this point. But I know that's part of the process. Some of the questions I have about differentiation is how does a teacher teach to a whole class in which some students have specific learning needs? When does a teacher make concessions that benefit individuals and not necessarily the whole class? How can a teacher plan for students of varying abilities within a single lesson and also groupings within that lesson? And how does a teacher anticipate learning differences and accommodate for them? Something that I've realized in this questioning is that because of the varying skill levels encountered in a classroom, differentiating my instructions means I need to find ways for every student to access the lesson and feel successful in accessing that lesson. I feel that success part is really crucial to their learning, that they feel like they can be successful. So a big part of my job is giving the students, the individual students, the tools they need to access it individually. Some of this might be communal and some of this might be done on an individual basis, but I feel that that's my job, and differentiation is a key to this. I brought in a few examples of differentiation that I've used this last one. I'll pass them around. They're not too novel, so you don't need to look at them too long. But the first example of differentiation is just differentiating a Hebrew text. This is during a Tanakh class we took. And some students are getting the text in Hebrew, and some students are getting the text in English and Hebrew. And this is done, you can check it out if you want. This is done subtly, so there's not like a stink made about it in the classroom. But students do know that the students who need this extra help, they're given the opportunity to participate. Something I talked about in my questioning is the different groupings. They're given the opportunity to participate in some of the activities with students who might be more advanced, because they're given the English alongside the Hebrew. This just kind of puts things at a level playing field for them right at the beginning. And in this particular lesson, it proved really successful because I think they really needed that extra help to get there, and it worked out. Something else I wanted to show you is how to differentiate. This is something that one of my mentor teachers, Andrea, has been doing, is going to be doing in her next unit. It's differentiating within a unit plan, and it's differentiating for 3 different kind of learners. I think she would call it just like her baseline learners, and it's in a Tanakh class as well. So the first level of differentiation, and this might be more interesting to look at, is she provides the Hebrew and English text. The next would be providing just the Hebrew text. And the last one, and this is actually going to relate to my question, is what do I do for as Samara calls it, the high flyers, the kids who you can tell right away are capable of taking that extra step. How do I make my lessons accessible to them in a way that's going to challenge them and enable them to get the most out of the lesson? So this kind of, you can pass it on, you can look at it too. This kind of represents some of the thinking I'm doing, and again, this is very much at the beginning stage. I'm very much at the beginning stages of thinking about differentiation, but it's something I want to really hone in on and explore more this semester. And you know, I probably won't be there at the end of this year, and I probably won't be there in 5 years from now, because there's a lot of refinement to do. But I'm excited to explore it, and I think that. So, and the reason, one more thing about this, the reason that this has been so enlightening for me is because I think when you walk into a classroom, differentiation a lot of times is done subtly, and it's done in a way, ideally in a way that includes everybody in the classroom, especially during differential teaching. So I think at the beginning of the year, this is something that I didn't necessarily even notice was going on in the classroom. And now, not only do I notice that it's going on, but I notice how crucial it is to hone in on the individual. And all of this goes back to knowing the individual. It's not just important to learn to know their learning needs, but also how they can access this emotionally. So it's important to get to know the student on an individual basis in that sense. So a lot of questions.
Questions and comments?
Well, I don't think we've ever talked about this, but that's my goal for this year too. So we could do this together. We could do like a joint study of like how to meet the needs of students on the high end. Or you could do your teacher research and I'll just learn from it. Just an idea. We can do that today. But that's really cool. We didn't talk about that.
Avi, you said you had started to notice these kind of subtle things. I wonder if you could describe just 1 or 2 examples.
Yeah, subtle things.
Yeah.
Just be specific. Subtle things in terms of differentiation.
Oh, in terms of differentiation that you noticed Samara and Andrea doing in the classroom.
Sure. Well, I think I kind of gave 2 examples. Like this is subtle. When they pass out like the text, it's subtle. Like you wouldn't know it if you're just observing the classroom that they have different text. But they're able to group to make the groupings heterogeneous because they've done this. So this is, I mean, it goes back certainly into the planning stage, but you have to plan for them. Yeah, I mean, there's a million examples. That was Jocelyn.
Do you ever have kids in your class who, because they know that they're on the lower end of Hebrew learning, often feel insecure and act out as a result of getting the English text versus the kids that they see are having the Hebrew text and are doing more advanced work?
Yeah, I think confidence is a big, and I think this is you have to tread lightly with differentiation. I think confidence is a big thing because, as we said, like you want to give them the tools to access the knowledge, and one of those tools is the confidence to do it. So I think that's part of the planning stage as well. I think you have to go back and look. I don't know. You guys know better than I do.
Hi, I want to say something. I salute you that you are thinking about it because not all the teachers always think about differentiation in their class, and it's wonderful. And in one point later on, you will save some behavior problems, because if you approach to every student, in Hebrew used to say that the digital file makat, and I think it's great. It's a lot of work. I'm just going back to the questions that you asked. It's a lot of work, but I don't know how many students you have in class. How many students?
26, 13 and 13.
26. Do you have any assistant in class? Or just
No, it's 13 at a time.
Oh, 13. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
It's
Okay.
split, yeah.
I see. So the way that you share the papers, it's wonderful, because also I don't think the students know who has modified paper and who's not. And it's great because sometimes students ask questions. And they feel like, oh, I got this, probably I'm stupid, you know what I mean? Like, so I think it's a great way that you mix up the papers. But there is so many ways. I can't say on the regular hat, but it's, you know, you can do it in chavruta, in small groups. You can mix up kids, the strong kids with a low groups, you know.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to do it. But it's great that you really point this out.
I think students actually know, like really know, that what everybody has, and you might think, okay, I did one question different on each of these pages, and they all know that everyone has something different. And I don't think there's anything wrong with them knowing that, and I think part of it is not just differentiating, but also making it clear to students, everybody, I'm going to be differentiating, I'm going to be giving everyone what they need, because if I gave you all the same thing, I would not be a good teacher. And I need to, as a teacher, you need to, not only do you need to know that, but then your students also need to know that, and create that community where they might know that the person sitting next to them has a different page, but there's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you, Ravi. Harika.
Okay. I will be focusing on the first standards, looking at the student as a whole. And before I came here, I had a big fear of, will I be able to see new student as my former student that I already built a relationship, I learned them, I know the family, I know where they struggle and what their strength. And learning this semester, first of all, learning in English, and this is my second language, I was able to see myself as a learner and to see what I'm struggling with. And then to look at my students and really understand them. And sometimes I really want to tell them, first of all, the one that they sometimes even block themselves because they're so struggling. I really know, I really understand, just but listen. So learning that and learning all the teaching approach, and I think that with time you get to the point that, okay, I have all this knowledge, and now I have all this theory, I know what I can lean on, I can use that, and really see the student, and even the new student that I have now, thanks to this knowledge, I can look at them in different eyes. I can, okay, I'm not only the one with the knowledge, I need to see you first. I need to see what you can really get from me. What I can teach a whole class, but if I'm not looking at them and know exactly what I can get, I miss the point. So seeing that, I think in a way, even Sal Heskel in her class, say you little just take it too far and be like a social worker because you really try to understand them too much. So to put a limit on how much you can understand your student, because they need to put an effort as well. I can motivate and appreciate a lesson, and I can work a lot, and I read all of my student IP over the break and really try to understand each one of them, but then come into class, okay, I done my share, now it's your turn, and how to do that. So doing that all the semester, and now what I'm really looking for is to see how can I apply it, and learn all a new approach to teach Hebrew that it's new to me. The proficiency, it can make sense how to use the language that way, and try to teach teach the student to use the language in a way that even they didn't thought they can do that, because they rely on the book so much that can I do it without? can I really function in a language? So those questions is the question that I'm asking myself, and I wonder a lot of everything that I learned here on theory, how it can really apply it, and it's really can fit every setting or every class or every student. But the one question that I really want to focus on is it possible to change a classroom culture for fifth graders that it's the last year in elementary school? They already feel the end. I know there's a term in English for that. It's only one semester left. I'm a new teacher for them. They used to a different setting. Is it possible to learn after learning all those amazing tools, to apply it in such a short time and to make it effective? So this is my big question. I don't know what others, but this is the one that I'm trying to be focusing on.
Comments and questions?
The easy answer is yes. Yeah, it's possible. It sounds like hard work, and like there's competing agendas, and they want to get out, and you want something from them, and there's the past that you're dealing with. But I definitely think it's possible. Structure and consistency and routine, and yeah, all those things can be your friend.
Can you give us some examples of the changes that you think you want to make and what you see as the barriers to making those changes? Or just even one example. What's a big change you'd like to make and what you see as the forces that are preventing that?
Okay. To be realistic, I would like for them to understand that for their action there's some results. If they do something, they're going to get a consistent consequences for that. To know that I don't need to repeat myself over and over. That if they're doing something for the first time, they all know what the consequences are going to be. I think this is the most important thing for me in the beginning, to start with that. I think all other things can be built on that, but if they know the structure, it will be easy for me to even add more, to put all the emphasis that I put on the content. Sometimes it can be irrelevant if I cannot teach it. So I worked hard over the break to plan a unit, and I wasn't able to teach it the way I wanted because of the structure. So I want to see how it can be for a new teacher.
Because actions don't have consequences? What you're saying, the structure, what is that?
It's the way the classroom and even the physical condition for the classroom sometimes add a lot of struggle and challenges for a teacher. And those students don't have a lot of faith in themselves. So they start the day, or my lesson and the Hebrew lesson, and feeling a failure. They gave up. And since the end of the semester, for them, it's the last semester in the school, they kind of gave up on Hebrew anyway. And I know that they struggle in more subjects as well. So I feel that in such an unimportant issue for them, I'm coming and trying to make big changes. Like,
get them to take it seriously.
Yeah, and I can understand. Like, what do you want from me? Just I'm done with that. I don't care much about it. Why are you trying to change my world? And I want to see if I can even do that. Even though I know I cannot change a lot, but I want to see if I can make the first move, and maybe that will and send them to the next teacher and continue from there.
I would just say that the people I've seen struggle the most in those situations are the ones who let their frustration and aggravation show in front of the kids. And so to just keep letting the kids feel the love and let them believe that you're there because you want to be and that you believe in them and you believe it'll change, even if like that sometimes requires a lot of acting on your part. I think that's really important because if they sense your frustration, then they're even more checked out.
Thank you. Thank you, Marisa. So I'm just gonna give us a moment if anybody wants to share any reflections on the process as a whole, anything that struck you about the presentations that you heard, or any reflections about the process.
Something in general to say, in Hebrew used to say, אין דבר העומד בפני הרצון, or as Ansel used to say, אם תרצו אין צעקתה. I mean, we as teachers, we as a leader, we can approach to every student, and we have to know how to do that. It's not easy. I always say also to Rovital, that it's not easy, with our students, to get the results right away. It's like a plant, that you put the seed and it takes time till you see all the results. It's not coming in a second. It takes time. We need a lot of patience, and God willing, we will see it in the near future. Not this grade, we'll see it in the next grade. This is how I believe. And I believe in every student, יש ניצוץ.
Can you translate?
Yes. So it's just a matter of time. And again, I believe as a teacher, we're all here for one goal. We want to see results. We want to see progress. And I believe that we have. It's coming in. Some students, it's coming right away. Some students, it's like step by step, spoon by spoon. So we can change. We can do everything. This is how I believe.
So I think that I hear you raising questions about teaching, even while you are worrying about whether or not you're going to take over more and more, right? So you're being asked not only to think about your craft and your repertoire and being prepared and knowing the content, but also to think about what's happening to you and what's happening to your students at the same time. And I think it's very impressive that where you are in terms of challenging yourself. But I would also say be a little tolerant of yourselves, because some of these things will come clearer to you not only during the next semester, but during the next year and the year after that. And that some of it, just like we look at our students and know it's developmental, some of it's developmental about us too, and about how many times we teach and even how we rethink those questions as we go at them. So I think that it's extraordinary where you are and what you're trying to do, and to dig deeper and to figure out what these very important questions are. But the way I think about it is it's like a spiral, and we keep coming back to them, and we move a little bit on the path, but it is definitely a spiral. And some of us are still struggling with some of these questions many, many years after we began. So I would really like to thank you and to congratulate you about where you are, and that you are taking that very seriously for yourselves as learners and for your students. So thank you.
I agree with that. I think that we live in a society where many people think teaching is not such a complicated practice, but I think that your learnings and your questions really reveal the complexity of a practice in which you have to connect subject matter to individual learners in an environment with clear expectations and consequences, and you're starting to really put things together. It's the simultaneity of all these considerations, day after day, over time, and it's really complex. And so I think Maria's right. We should we have to work hard at this, building our practice, but it's a complex undertaking, and you're really in impressively sophisticated places as beginners. As beginners, you're asking sophisticated questions about this practice and trying to put things together, which is ultimately what happens when you feel like you're teaching. You're putting all of these things together, but a construction process.
So thank you.
Yeah.